You
And
amazingly convinced someone to give you their life savings when you were 16. Can you tell us what happened? Because the early years of your discovery of investing are kind of crazy.
yeah, like looking back, I'm just thinking about certain things that happened. They were all very, very positive when it came to investing. So Value Line was one. Um, I really wanted to get some hands-on experience. And so there was a company called, I'll get to the raising money, but there's a company called Waterhouse Securities, which had just gone public. So I was aware of it. And they opened a branch at the Stanford Mall in Connecticut. So I applied for a job there and I got a job. And my job was to stuff the trade confirmations in the envelopes. And the person who had that job before finished every day like around 3:30. And I finished around noon, which meant that from noon to 4, I could just watch. And what I saw was that every day, more and more people were coming into the office. There were quote machines, so you could sit. Like it's not so unusual now, but you could come in, you can sit and look at your quotes, and people would trade, right? People would trade. And I would see every single morning, I would get more and more confirmations to stuff into my little envelopes. And so I thought, gee, business is doing really, really well. So I bought the stock. And the stock symbol was WHOO, Waterhouse Securities. And it just was crazy. It went crazy.
Mm.
And that was another positive, formidable experience for me. Like that was very positive. And Kevin Waterhouse actually ran that branch. He was the son of Larry Waterhouse, who sold the company to TD. So that's how I met Kevin Waterhouse.
Mm.
And we became friends during that time. And then I really wanted to manage money. I thought for some reason I knew what I was doing. Crazy me, right? And so I thought I should be managing some money, but no one would give me any money. So I started just kind of knocking on doors, to use an expression. One of those doors was a restaurant called Lotus East in Greenwich, Connecticut, on Greenwich Avenue. Lotus East was run by this wonderful guy, Johnny Chang. And Johnny knew I loved orange beef. And so I would go in after school and I would try to order, I would order orange beef from him. And he would go out and he would actually buy filet mignon just for me to make orange beef, which is, I don't know, usually made with skirt steak or something. So he would make me orange beef. And when I was eating orange beef, we would talk stocks. And William, you know how like Chinese like to gamble, right?
Yeah, yeah. I used to live in Hong Kong.
So I was telling Johnny, look, you're not going to get wealthy gambling. And of course, I had already read Graham and Fisher and so forth. So I convinced him that, the way to make money is not to trade, but to buy good companies and hold on to them. So about a year later, about a year of conversation, he gave me $400,000, which was his life savings. And
you were 16, right? I mean, really
16.
Young.
I was 16, so he was my first client. The 400,000 though came with now that I'm thinking about it, the 400,000 came with one string attached. And that was that I had to take his daughter to prom.
How?
She was another school. So I took her daughter to prom and I took the 400,000.
How?
And I roughly tripled his money. So he was happy and his daughter was happy and I was happy. And so he became my first client, really. And then I knocked on other doors. I went to a hairdresser who cut my hair. He gave me like 50,000 or something. I went to a couple other people. Eventually I had 5 clients. And that was the maximum you could have in Connecticut. And I formed a company called Tsai Asset Management. And I had 5 clients. And that is all I could have under Connecticut or SEC law. I don't remember. I think it was Connecticut law. And I managed that money.
And your mum chipped in $1 million, something like that? Or was that later?
No, that was later.
Huh.
That was later. And so now I'm at Middlebury College. And Tsai Asset Management is still operating, and I have these 5 clients, and it was just way too much for me to do. So I gave that money back, and I focused on majoring in philosophy and international politics at Middlebury. Philosophy because I read Peter Lynch and George Soros major in philosophy. So I said I better give philosophy a try, and I loved it. And after graduating from Middlebury, I went to work for Bear Stearns on the sell side, covering packaged food companies. But for various reasons, we can get into that if you want, but for various reasons, I decided to leave Bear Stearns very quickly and launch my business. I went back to those 5 original clients. This was before I came out to my father. This was, autumn of 1997. And I went to my father to ask him for money. He said no. So I said, okay, I'll just go to my mother. I asked my mother for money. She gave me $1 million, and I raised the other couple $1 million from the people that I knew in the past and a couple new people. And so we launched with $3 million.
Why do you think your dad didn't want to back you in any way?
Well, that is a very interesting question. I will tell you that, and I'll be pretty open about this because he's passed away, but he had a falling out over money with his first son, who was with Loretta Tsai, and he disowned him. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, we don't talk today. He is alive. We don't talk today. I never really got to spend much time with him for whatever reason. My parents never really connected us. But he had a falling out with his first son over money. And he made sure that he wanted to make sure that his other 2 children, myself and my sister, were not handed anything, and that we had to, kind of do things on our own. And so that's why.
In some ways, it's an interesting situation you're in, right? Because, I think it's fair to say that your father was a billionaire. At least that's how he's been written about. He was immensely successful, important CEO, iconic investor. And so you grew up in this incredibly privileged environment, but it's weird. So you were around very rich, very successful people. You grew up seeing people like Larry Tisch, around the dinner table and the like. And yet it sort of wasn't really handed to you on a plate. You don't have a huge amount of assets under management. You've had to kind of struggle and hustle and build your own ecosystem and a network and the like. How do you feel about that in retrospect? Are you glad that it's been a struggle? Do you sort of resent it? What's it been like?
Well, I truly feel that happiness comes. My children asked me about happiness recently, and I said that happiness, for me at least, comes from the overcoming of struggle. It's not like struggling; it comes from the overcoming of struggle. And I think that in many ways, my father did me a huge advantage by not backing me on the front and not backing me at all, basically. So, but on the other hand, we would be probably much, much larger. And so there's, like George Bush said, 2 sides to a pancake, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I have been able to build a business. The really positive aspect of not having influence from my father during those years when he wasn't talking to me was that I was able to build the business in a way that I thought made sense for me. Not only from the investment philosophy standpoint, but just kind of the structure of the business. Not having this kind of huge infrastructure, but trying to manage money in a way that I think is aligned with many of your friends and many of my friends.
In some ways, you get an interesting opportunity to kind of redo your father's life, right? Like he, in many ways, was an immensely successful person, but in some ways, his life was kind of a disaster, right? In personal terms, he had all these divorces. He had squabbles with at least a couple of his, well, I think probably at different times he was on the outs with all three of you, if I remember correctly. I mean, he wasn't an easy father. Clearly, it's complex. And I was wondering, when you think about kind of applying this lesson of inversion from Charlie about how to have a truly successful life, how you think about it, because I remember you mentioning Charlie's friend Peter Kaufman, who I know has also become a mentor to you, and a piece that he'd written on the 7 steps of the ladder in his One Ladder presentation. Can you talk about that, about how Peter Kaufman, who's a brilliant guy, who is the CEO of Glen Eyre, I believe, still a great thinker, how he's helped to clarify this sense of what actually constitutes a successful life and how it has to be multifaceted. It can't just be like your dad making an enormous amount of money, becoming kind of famous, becoming an important CEO and deal maker. The success has to be broader than that.
Well, when you're on your deathbed, nobody says to themselves, I wish I had another week at the office, right? They're reflecting on the quality of their life, the quality of the individuals that they might be leaving behind, right? Their offspring, the relationships with them. And so that's inversion, right? But you're mentioning Peter's wonderful presentation called, I think it's called One Ladder. And for those of your listeners who are not familiar with this presentation, he talks about life as one ladder. And so most people, they go through life and they say, okay, I'm going to try to make, I'm going to get great grades so I can go to this school. And then I'm going to make so much money so then I could spend more time with my family, or then I might do this, and then I might do that. But Peter said that, look, you need to look at your life as one ladder, and there's 7 steps to the ladder. These 7 steps are pretty much in this order: health, and then family and friends, career, community, spirituality, and hobbies. The most important of those 7 steps is health, because health is multiplicative, right? If you take health and you multiply it by 0, everything else goes to 0. Not good. So you want to focus on that as first and foremost. But I really try to hit these 7 pieces of the ladder as best as I can. And one of the areas that I think that, or probably 2 of the areas that I think that I'm lacking, is on the community side and on the spirituality side. William, you and I had this really wonderful, open, meaningful conversation over dinner, you will recall, at Value X. And we spoke a bit about religion and spirituality. And I was really touched by our conversation, which seemed to just go take us through the entire dinner, right? And I think it was the whole dinner we were talking like nonstop. And during this conversation, I was thinking about these ladders, and meditation is as close as I can get to spirituality. I wish I had more in that area. Not sure how to figure that out. And community. But over time, I think that these are the 2 steps that I really want to work on. But life should be.
I can help with both of those. You'll have to help me. You'll have to help me on the health stuff, because
we can help each other. Yeah, we can help each other.
That's the thing I'm really good at sacrificing. Like, if I'm given a choice between meditating and reading, profound spiritual or philosophical books, or going on the Peloton, it's like a pretty easy choice for me. I'm going to read, I'm going to sit. I'm like a master of the sedentary. And so for me, that's a really hard thing. And so, I mean, I think it's very helpful for us to know that a successful and happy and abundant life is multifaceted. That's key, because I think a lot of people aren't even that aware of it. And they're just, I think also there's a sort of survival stage of our lives where you're just trying to hustle to get ahead and to get a foot on the ladder. And so necessarily you neglect other stuff. But I think one of the things that happen, you're a little younger than I am, 5 years, 6 years younger than me. But I think one thing that happens in middle age is you start to sort of pause and look and think like, well, no, actually, I've achieved all of this stuff, but I've neglected this area, and this area, and it just feels imbalanced. And so I think that's one of the gifts of middle age is that if you're lucky, you get to think a little bit more about this balance. But it's hard when you're raising kids as well. You have 13-year-old daughters, right?
14 now.
14. So, I mean, that's intense. Work is intense. Then if you have to exercise as well, and you got to be a good spouse and stuff, it's something is likely to get neglected.
Why should it be easy, right?
Yeah, but at least we sort of have a sense of what it is. And so I think that Kaufman thing on the seven steps is really helpful because it gives you a map. So at least you know what you've got to do.
It also helps when you grow up in an environment where you see that your father is not happy. And I think that I did see that very early. And I remember this conversation, like we were in his limo, and maybe when I'm just guessing now, I was definitely in my teens, early teens, and we were in his limo, and we're on driving to either a movie or a dinner, because that's pretty much all we did when I was in Manhattan with him. Mm. And he looks at me, and just out of the blue, he says, I just crossed 100 million of net worth. What do you think of that? And he was looking for my approval. And I probably didn't realize it at the time, but I definitely realize it now, because it was out of the blue. He asked me this question. He was looking for approval, but I knew that he was never satisfied with where he was financially, right? Didn't matter, how much money he had. He wasn't satisfied with that. And he was unhappy about that. And he knew he was successful, but he also thought he was not successful. And the reason why he thought he was not successful is because I think he knew that he neglected certain areas of his life. And he was also told when he was a child that he would never amount to anything. And we were talking about early childhood experiences and how they can go in different ways. Some of his experiences were probably very unpleasant for him, but they helped drive him to financial success, but also probably a life that he wasn't very happy about. So one example, I can tell you that I grew up in this enormous house in Greenwich, which was owned by Rockefeller's partners. I think his name was Teagle. I forget his first name. Teagle was his last name. And we had these 20-foot high living room ceilings. And my father had just bought a Calder sculpture. He was had very good eyes with respect to art. He was very early to art, as he was to most of the growth companies that he bought. And so he had this Calder sculpture, and he paid quite a bit of money for it. And my grandfather comes over and says to my dad, what's this hanging on the ceiling? My father said, it's Calder. And my grandfather said, well, how much did you pay? And dad says, I paid 50. And grandfather said, 51. And my father said, 50,000. And grandpa turned to my grandmother and said, you see, our son doesn't know the value of money. He bought this piece for 50,000. He's not going to amount to anything.
Right.
And when he was very little, apparently, his father said, you can't even tie your shoes. You're not going to amount to anything. So those were some of his experiences that pushed him into a certain direction. So I think these early childhood experiences are a lot more important than we give credit to.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. And you grew up going to galleries and the like with him and seeing him collect. And then you've become an important art collector. And before I let you go, I did want to ask you about Ai Weiwei, who's really important and has become a really important part of your life. And for people who don't know, Christopher has been described in magazines like Forbes as the world's foremost collector of Ai Weiwei's art. And Ai Weiwei is this incredible Chinese artist and filmmaker and activist and dissident and architect and provocateur and just kind of a genius who was born in 1957 and became famous, I think, partly because he got jail for something like 83 days around 2011 for what were called economic crimes. And he's written these, he's made these amazing films and stuff. And I wondered if you could talk to us a bit about your relationship with him, because he's been a profoundly important figure in your life over the last 20 years. And it's unusual to have got as close to a great artist as you've got in this case.
Well, I was very lucky to meet him, actually. Should have been around 2002, roughly, within a year. I went to China with an art dealer, and I thought that Chinese contemporary art was really, really interesting. And it appeared to me to be also just ridiculously underfollowed and consequently undervalued. So I went with an art dealer to Beijing and went to many, many studios to visit artists just see their work firsthand. And one of those artists was Ai Weiwei, who was well known. He was definitely somebody the other artists looked up to, but he was not by any means a global figure, not the global figure that he is today. So our relationship started very slowly. We kept in touch. Around 2006 or so, I wanted to build a country house in upstate New York, and realized that, you got to have an architect to build a country house. So I thought, well, wouldn't it be great if Ai Weiwei designed it? Because I saw the studio that he designed in Beijing and really, really loved it. He's not a trained architect, but he's an artist, right? Artists can draw and come up with ideas. So I called him up, and he said, yeah. And so he designed our house upstate, which has a really, really interesting story, actually. And this so-called Tsai residence won a whole bunch of awards. And when the house was done, we didn't have any Ai Weiwei art, so we thought that was really weird. And we decided, look, maybe we should really learn about his art a lot more than what he's done for architecture. And we just started studying and talking to him, and bought our first piece, bought our second piece, and bought our third piece. And what's been amazing, like working with him and talking to him and having a close relationship with him, is that he's helped to curate our collection. So our collection of Ai Weiwei dates back, it covers every decade. It covers his 70s, 80s, and there are very few works from the 70s that even exist. We have a bunch of them. So 70s, 80s, 90s, every decade up to now. And he's helped curate that collection. So one of the benefits of, collecting an artist that's still alive is you can really talk with him or her about that whole process and, what means what to each period.
I was really curious looking at some of the artworks of his that you bought over the years. One of, you have these kind of iconic jade handcuffs that he had that are, I think, a replica of the shackles he wore when he was in detention in 2011. But one of the things that really struck me was the Coca-Cola vase. Can you talk about that? Or if I were American, I would say Coca-Cola vase. Tell us what that is, because it's kind of a really interesting sort of encounter between Chinese history and culture and American global consumerism and capitalism.
Yeah, for sure. And a lot of his work plays off of that theme. He has a company, by the way, called Fake Fake.
Oh.
And, or at least he did have a company called Fake Fake. I don't know if it exists anymore, but a lot of his work plays on this contrast between consumerism and original, and what's fake and what's not. And his work's been influenced by Marcel Duchamp. For those who don't know Duchamp, he changed how people think about art by making the idea as important as the actual object. So Duchamp really gave birth to contemporary art in many ways. And he said that a duplicate has as much value and is as important as the original. And so I think that Weiwei has been extremely influenced by Duchamp, and you see these ideas of consumerism and what's real and what's fake play out in his work, from the Coca-Cola vase to his iconic Ai Weiwei, the Zodiac heads.
So just to explain what the Coca-Cola vase is for people who can't picture it, he took, like, I guess it was a Han Dynasty Chinese vase, so it's thousands of years old, and then paints the Coca-Cola logo on it. So it's sort of got the ultimate symbol of American capitalism and global market domination from Coca-Cola, but on this beautiful historic object. And then he did another. Sorry, you go on.
Yeah, and he's erasing traditional Chinese culture, the original Han Dynasty vase, right? He's erasing that by painting over it. But he's also commenting on the fact that China as a government has erased so much of its own history.
Does seeing the world through the eyes of Ai Weiwei make you much less willing to invest in China? Because you used to invest in China a long time ago, like a decade or so ago, when you were investing in companies like Jardine Matheson and the like, which own lots of stuff in Asia, like the Mandarin Hotel, the Mandarin Oriental in Hong Kong, which is a lovely hotel. But it seems like you almost did a kind of reshoring where you came back to the US and you focus on the US. And I'm wondering if in some way you kind of fell out of love with China, partly because of Ai Weiwei and you saw the way he was treated, or what happened there?
Everybody has said, William, that you do such in-depth research, and you found our old investment in Jardine Matheson. I'm super impressed, because that's not out there easily findable. I've focused much more on U.S. companies, and because I've actually been influenced by Peter Kaufman in that regard. And so Peter has spoken about China. He's spoken about countries like Russia, and he's spoken about countries like Singapore, and he's compared them to America and Europe. And one thing that he has said is that, for there to be real success, you need to have a system that appreciates education, right? Newtonian style. You've got to appreciate education, and you have to have respect for intellectual property. You have to have respect for physical property. You won't get creativity if you don't have respect for IP. And you need to be in a system where the regulation is just below the tipping point where you would force companies and people to go elsewhere, and you have to have taxation below what people consider confiscation. And if you think about that, and you think about it that way, you don't want to be invested in China. I mean, at least I don't. And I'm pretty sure that Peter wouldn't either, for those reasons. And so I've increasingly over the years appreciated the system in which I've grown up, which is America. And I increasingly appreciate the rule of law here, and the transparency and the tremendous innovation that is born here as a result of respect for IP and physical property, and a system that does not confiscate wealth to the point where people want to flee and go somewhere else. So we're totally focused here, and that might mean that we wind up with a lower rate of return. There might be more fish in the pond somewhere else. There might be bigger fish in the pond somewhere else. But for me, it's not a question of just return, right? It's a question of duration of return, and it's a question of not having to go back to go. So we want to make sure that in the capital that we manage for individuals, capital we manage for retirement accounts and high net worth individual accounts, foundations, we manage money for charitable organizations, that we never have to go back to go. And that number one, the preservation of capital has to be the first and foremost thing. And I would rather sacrifice some alpha for investing in a system that encompasses some of these things that Peter talks about. So we're almost entirely focused. Well, we are entirely focused on U.S. companies, but they're multinational companies, right? And they have revenue and earnings, look through earnings from all over the world, and that suits us very well, and it suits our client base well.